Great. Welcome, everyone, to this session of the Demand Gen Summit. I'm joined by Tara Pollock. For those of you who don't know Tara, she is the VP of Marketing at Revenue Grid. They are pioneers in revenue intelligence, delivering proven market-leading solutions that enhance sales performance and expand revenue generation. Before we get started, I'd love for you, Tara, to just tell us a little bit more about yourself and Revenue Grid.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks, Jenny. Thanks for having me. Yeah, so I am Tara Pollock, and I like to call myself the intentional marketer, meaning a lot of people kind of stumble into marketing, but I've actually been doing marketing ever since undergrad, internships, different roles and things like that. But I primarily focus on B2B tech. I love startups, I love change. And so like demand gen and strategy is really like where my heart falls every single day. And to tell you a little bit about Revenue Grid, we are a revenue intelligence platform. And what that means is we try to make sure that everybody within the revenue function at an organization has the opportunity to move revenue forward. And so we really dive into every interaction, every relationship, every deal, every moment counts, especially these days, and bring that to the surface using a variety of capabilities depending on the role.
No, I love that. It's a really interesting company, what you guys do. And I mean, data is so important. And so just being able to leverage your data in a way to push that revenue forward is always so helpful. I know we were talking a little bit before this, and it's a really challenging time. We're always being asked to do more with less. And I think you guys have taken a route to kind of like return to the basics, and that's kind of what we'll be talking on today. And the play that you had mentioned is really just taking a step back and better understanding like your ideal customer and who is actually buying your platform. What are some tools that you guys have found when trying this and going back to kind of like these basic principles?
Yeah, I think when you say it out loud, it sounds very like basic and, like foundational marketing. But I think with the marketing, depending on who you serve, and times just change so fast, especially if you're in kind of a tech SaaS business, right? So understanding really what your customer can't live without is really important, right? Like every marketer wants to be, selling something that is a need to have, right? Not like a nice to have. So really to understand that you have to open up your customer base, and their businesses change, right? Organizations change. Like maybe even if what you're selling hasn't changed that much, like your customers have changed. So late last year, like I was telling you before, we have a very broad customer base as a marketer, which is amazing, right? It's like, oh, we serve, all these industries and different size companies, but it's actually difficult when you come back and you start to like orchestrate strategy and planning and budget and resources and where to align them. So we underwent a big customer kind of research project, which includes surveys, but we also did customer interviews, which I personally love. And it's something that I know when I get into certain roles of, I'm not talking to customers all day long, but volunteering, I would suggest to any marketer to be part of a project who can just listen in on customers and get to know them. And it just has like kind of the light bulbs go off as you talk live with customers. And so we're trying to hone in, who loves our product the most, who can't live without it, who you hear different snippets of reasons why they bought, but then there's also reasons why they stay. And I think that kind of morph into a lot of the focus of the marketing team.
That's really interesting. What would you say? I don't know. I think it can be challenging as marketers to like really find the time, like meeting with customers and prioritizing that. What would you say to like marketers who are maybe struggling finding that time? Like, there has to be like the value add like is so much greater than like the time that it takes.
Yeah, it's a great point. I think working directly with, who heads up your customer success, customer experience, and telling them the type of customer that you want to really get the chance to talk to. And I think there's a lot of people that are in marketing that you wouldn't think should be on the call too, just to listen in. I'm a big believer in it doesn't matter what role you are. Like even if you're a designer or something like that, it's like we're all trying to serve customers at the end of the day. And so I would encourage even small teams to, come up with who they would want to interview, and don't make it very lengthy. Don't ask a long, like an hour can be a lot for a customer, right? Especially if they're one of your favorites or they're always willing to help out. You tend to like stick around the same types of customers because if they love you, they're willing to be an evangelist for you. So I would narrow that down to like exactly who you're looking to talk to and know the why before you go in. And get all that like previous history, whether it's like data from the systems, hopefully you can see, or all that previous history from customer success, and kind of like the divide and conquer. And also ask for help, right? If you're in a small marketing team, like definitely ask for help and say like, hey, we're all like in this together. And so I just need a couple of people. You'd be surprised at people that will raise their hand, right? That'll say like, oh, I'd love to do it. I'd love to interview our customers, or I'm happy to help. So,
yeah. One thing you mentioned is, I kind of started thinking about when you were talking about like these different kinds of customers and really understanding who your buyer is. You said that you guys kind of sell to like all the verticals, and it can be exciting as a marketer to like have that much freedom, but it can also be really challenging because you have a limited budget. So what advantages would you say really come from being able to narrow down and take all that customer information to better identify who to sell to and align your messaging?
Yeah, I think the biggest advantage is coming up with messages that make sense not only for, the persona. So we have like a pretty large buying committee that gets involved. Like we have the influencer and the champion and the decision maker, and then like the hidden stakeholder that comes in out of nowhere, right? But you still have to be aware of them. And I think speaking their language is like the biggest advantage. If you break it down into say like a specific vertical, because if you think about it, you have to break it into like the language that they might be using, and then that also that person. So all of a sudden you're now like have so many different messages or different campaigns and things like that. And so I think the biggest advantage is becoming like a human to human versus like a marketer to, a buying committee, right? Because they're like, oh, wow, they understand me, or that's the same language I use, or, maybe it's one of their competitors or, someone else in the industry that they recognize a story that you're telling through ads or messaging or whatever it is. And we all know that the amount of touch points seem to be getting higher and higher, especially if you're in SaaS, of getting someone's attention these days. And I think explaining that to people outside of marketing is super important. It's like you could be everything to everybody, but unless you're sitting on a very large marketing budget, it's like borderline impossible to execute and have the ROI that you want.
Yeah. So where are you guys choosing to really focus then? Is it just all coming from these customer interviews, or is it more of just focusing where you're getting the largest return on investment?
So I would say it's more about the customer interviews and understanding our most popular use cases of the customer. So we kind of put them into like two buckets for revenue grid and say like, okay, within these two like use cases that we have like the highest satisfaction, we have a good amount of customers in these segments, what does that look like? And so like that's where then you can really focus down and it's like, okay, this is the challenge that we're helping solve for their business. For example, in healthcare, right? And this is actually how they use our platform to help propel their business forward. And so it becomes like wide, and then you just like keep kind of like niching it down. And that's why then you can put stories in there that people like recognize within that same industry, or, a RevOps leader might have the same challenges as another RevOps leader in that same capacity in the jobs that they have to do every day.
Yeah, I think it really ties into kind of people don't really want to buy a platform. They're really looking to buy a solution. And so I think it's really interesting that you mentioned the different use cases and just continuing to narrow it down and talking to them like they're humans and really identifying what their different pain points are, and being able to provide a solution based on their needs.
Yeah, absolutely. And especially as like a buyer in today's world, you need to put yourself in their shoes. Like they're putting their name on the line to buy something new, right? And they have to do their due diligence and prove the business case. And so when you see someone in sales that's like really helping be like a partner to them and proving the business case internally, it's like the light bulbs go off, and then you're like, oh, okay, they're not really selling something. They're actually like investing in me and my company to be successful. They're not like selling to close the deal. It's like they're really trying to investigate, like, does this work for our company? What would the outcomes be if we, bought, implemented, and adopted this?
Yeah, I think something else we could kind of talked about is like there's these certain pain points when you're buying a product. I'm sure all of us as marketers are looking to buy and add to our tech stacks or maybe even simplify. But like the worst is when you're in the sell process and you're like, okay, tell me really what this product does. And they're kind of just like everything. And so I think it all ties into what you're saying about really understanding your customers, really understanding what parts of the tools they're using and seeing that return on. So that when they're like, what can your product do? You can then tailor your message to meet their needs.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, as a consumer or a buyer, you go learn what you want to learn, but you have to like tie it back to how it's going to like help you as an individual or the business. And I've seen some sellers who are amazing at building relationships and moving that forward. What are your challenges in your role today? If I could help you do X, Y, and Z, is that something you're interested in? And it's like a two-way conversation. And a lot of times it's not about the demo. It's not about the hidden features. To your point, there's so much sometimes in a lot of platforms that are just like, and all organizations are built differently, right? Some of them, you buy something, you need like a team of 3 people, and you're like, no, I'm a startup. Like, I don't have anyone to manage this. So I think understanding more and more of like the customer and how their organization is set up, like, couldn't be like more important today.
Yeah. When you go about, so like we kind of talked a little bit about like understanding your customers and their needs, but I guess we could probably dig in a little bit more about understanding your buying committees. You had mentioned briefly kind of just like these different kind of categories you put them under. You talked about like this influencer. Is it just by collaborating with your sales team that you really can start to put together those buying committees? Someone who's maybe like trying to go back to the basis and build this out, like where do they really get started?
Yeah, and it depends on what you're selling, but really peeling back during the selling process. And then I also encourage people, like, when they are customers, right? Like, what happens then? Like, who stays in contact with the account? Who might have, this kind of like special like authority or the hidden stakeholder where they have to get approval from. Like, a great example of that is like a security officer or technology officer, right? Like, we can be in the middle of something and they come in and they kind of quabosh something, right? Because it's not up to their standards or their policy. And even if you have a really good business case, then, that's really difficult for your sales team. And so, yeah, I would start with the sales team of understanding. I mean, obviously you can start with them, but hopefully you can dig into your CRM or wherever your data is and really do that relationship mapping of understanding who's involved and how much. It's actually something Revenue Grid's product does. Is relationship mapping. I won't sell you on it, but it's really interesting to see how many interactions across organizations and roles, how involved they are, and like where in the buying process they come in too. It's like,
yeah,
you have maybe 1, 2, like, and then that team starts to invite more people, right? And if you're like more up market, and then that when you get closer to like really getting to maybe like a contract proposal stage and putting that out there, it's like all of a sudden all these other people came in. But if you're the seller, you're like, I haven't even spoken to this person. You're like, what's their pain? What's their challenges? And so like the more you can learn about the buying committee as a marketer, you actually can help educate your champions on what their colleagues might want when they come into the mix.
No, I love that. I guess it's with the basics, it's all these unspoken things that I feel like everyone kind of has a feeling and a sense for, but actually hearing it, just like the whole, like preparing your champions so that when they have those conversations, they can help facilitate it, the selling process. I mean, it's something so simple as like having buying committees and knowing who they are and where they are in the different stages can help speed up essentially speed up your sales process because you're not having to do all this guessing and all this thinking on the fly.
Yeah, definitely. It also helps like anticipate the next steps and the questions that might come up, or you're kind of like one step ahead because you kind of know that process and you can help. A lot of times, like the people that might be the decision maker or champion, they don't go and buy, this platform or software service like every day. You know what I mean? So it's like, it's really your job to like guide them through it. And they're usually like kind of your best friend through it. They're the ones that want this more than anything at the organization. If you can make their job easier and make them look like the hero, like, wow, they did so much like due diligence and research, right? And a lot of that just has to come with like marketing content and like sales enablement, but it all goes together, right? Like once you have that, it sounds like a lot, but you can like weave that into like messages that really like hit home with the right people.
Yeah, no, I think it just makes so much sense. Is there, before we wrap up, anything that we haven't touched on that you would like us to bring up? I mean, you talked a little bit about Revenue Grid and kind of like you guys can help really facilitate this buying committee. I don't know if there's anything more we can dig into with it being like not a sales pitch, but just like a little, like if it is a solution that someone who's maybe struggling in forming and creating those connections of the buying committee, if it's a tool that could help them.
Yeah, I would say just understanding, it's again simple, but like the data is like everything. And if you're having trouble, just like there's a lot of organizations out there that are still at like the beginning and they're not really, investing in revenue intelligence, and what that means is different to everybody, but you have to start with the foundation. Like you're only going to be as good as the data. And like we all know that, but it's one other thing to put that in action. So if you're missing some of those interactions with the buying committee, if you're not being able to like see the recorded calls or Slack messages or attachments in your Outlook, and that's not within your CRM, it's like you're actually doing a disservice to your own marketing and sales team, right? Because those like little interactions are gold. And then once you have that, being able to analyze, interpret it is also hard as humans, right? And that's where like, if you can leverage a company that has like insights and AI on top of that, and it shouldn't be complicated, right? That's the other thing. Like when we hear it, you're like, oh, that's a lot, right? Platforms like Revenue Grid exist to be like seamless. And I think it's around that question of like, like AI, where it's supposed to be guiding and helping, people that sit on like a revenue type of function and make them more efficient and more productive and actually give them time back in their day, versus this like idea of like, oh, they're going to like take over my job. Right.
Right. No, I love that. I think overall, like my biggest takeaway is like, it's okay to return to the basics. Like remember to slow down, and sometimes it can be overwhelming, like to have to build your whole customer profile or build out these buying committees. But from what you're talking about, the data is already there and we just need to be leveraging it.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think it's also a good exercise. Like I said, I think prior that you should be doing this anyways as a marketer, right? Because things just change. There's trends. Customers might like it'd be amazing if they like some of the new product enhancements that you have that you've rolled out maybe 6 months ago, It's something like that. And so I think it's a good exercise to just go through no matter what it looks like at an organization, to make sure that you're really close to the customer. I've had this G2 stat in my head like for a couple of years now, that it says like every single time a customer is at coming up on renewal, about 60% of them are like speaking to a competitor.
Yeah.
So you're just like, think about that. It's like that process never goes away. And so if you can invest in anything, it's really understanding your customers and their challenges and their insights as a marketer. So
great. Well, I've really enjoyed our conversation, and we really appreciate you joining us at the Demand Gen Summit. If someone's wanting to get a hold of you or reach out to Revenue Grid, is the best way is just through LinkedIn?
Yep, absolutely. LinkedIn.
Great. Well, thank you again for joining us today.
Yes, thank you.